The southern swamp had always been a place of quiet menace and beauty, a land where time seemed to stand still amidst the thick fog and towering trees. The swamp stretched for miles, a labyrinth of murky waters, vines, and dangerous wildlife. Tom Ellis, a seasoned hunter with years of experience, had come to know its depths like no other. At 42, he was rugged and independent, a man who earned respect in the local community for his knowledge of the swamp and his ability to track rare animals through its unpredictable terrain. For Tom, the swamp wasn't just his profession. It was his way of life. He had lived most of his life in its shadow, learning its moods, respecting its dangers, and understanding its silence. It was an unpredictable land, but Tom knew it better than anyone. He had mastered the jungle's rhythm and knew exactly when to trust his instincts and when to be cautious. On October 12, 2005, Tom set off for a solo hunting trip into the heart of the swamp. His goal was to track down a rare species of deer that had been spotted deeper within the marshes. The creature was elusive, but Tom's vast experience made him confident he could find it. He was well prepared, with all his necessary supplies, and the swamp was familiar ground to him. There was no fear in his voice as he bid his wife, Lana, goodbye. Tom had made similar trips countless times before. It was part of their routine. Lana knew he would be back by evening, and life would return to its normal rhythm. She trusted Tom's knowledge of the land. They had shared quiet evenings on the porch, talking about the day's events, the swamp's serenity still in their ears. But this time, Tom called Lana just before heading further into the swamp, saying, "I'm going deeper. Lana, I'll be back by dusk." That was the last time Lana heard from him. By the following morning, as hours passed without a word from Tom, Lana began to feel uneasy. Tom was always punctual. He never missed a check-in. By noon, the unease turned into full-blown concern. She tried calling, but his phone went straight to voicemail. At 1 p.m., Lana knew something was wrong. She went to the sheriff's office, and deputies were dispatched to the swamp immediately. They knew Tom well, and his disappearance was taken seriously. Tom's truck was found parked at the trailhead. The engine was still warm, the headlights casting a dim glow over the swamp. His hunting gear, normally packed neatly, was scattered across the ground as if left in a hurry. His wallet, keys, and cell phone were found on the truck's front seat, undisturbed. But there was no sign of Tom. There were no footprints, no signs of struggle, no clues. The dense brush around the trailhead appeared untouched. It was as if Tom had simply vanished. Search teams, including local volunteers, police, and search dogs, scoured the area. Helicopters flew overhead, scanning the swamp for any signs of Tom. But there was nothing, no signs of his camp, no disturbed earth, and no evidence of where he had gone. It was as though the swamp had swallowed him whole. By nightfall, the search was called off. The helicopters disappeared into the distance, and the searchers returned to base, exhausted and frustrated. Tom Ellis, a man who had spent his life navigating this swamp, had vanished without a trace. The swamp, however, seemed indifferent. The vines and trees whispered their usual eerie sounds, as if the land itself had claimed him. Days turned into weeks, and the search continued without any progress. The locals began to speculate. Had Tom fallen into the swamp? Could he have been attacked by wildlife? Or had he fled? Some whispered of strange figures in the swamp, travelers who had disappeared in similar circumstances. The swamp was old, its history deep. Some believed it had claimed Tom. Just as it had claimed others before, it had become a myth, a place where people disappeared without explanation. The town named this part of the swamp the Hollow Mire, where people just vanished, swallowed by the jungle. Lana refused to believe that Tom was gone. She couldn't. He would always return, just as he had done in the past. Tom's truck, his gear, his belongings all stayed as they were. Lana couldn't bear to move them. She kept his hunting cabin the same, waiting for his return, but time passed, and the case grew colder. The swamp, it seemed, had kept its secrets tightly hidden. The town began to move on. People whispered, But eventually, Tom's disappearance became just another mystery lost to the swamp's vastness. But for Lana, the pain never faded. She couldn't let go. No matter how much time passed, Tom had always come back. She believed he would again. By nightfall, Tom Ellis had vanished, and the swamp had swallowed him whole, leaving no trace. The southern swamp remained as silent and treacherous as ever. But life in the small town nearby had begun to move on. For Lana Ellis, the world around her was unchanged, a constant reminder of the man who had disappeared into the swamp without a trace. Tom's disappearance had left a void that nothing could fill. His presence had been so ingrained in their everyday life. And without him, the air seemed still, heavy, as though the swamp had taken more than just Tom. It had taken their peace. At first, Lana refused to believe that Tom was gone. She held out hope, convinced that the search would eventually find him, that she would hear his familiar voice, see his rough hands emerge from the underbrush, and hold him again. But days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and then months into years. The search efforts dwindled. The police had combed the swamp. The helicopters had searched the skies, and the dogs had sniffed out every corner. But there was still no sign of Tom. The town moved on, and life returned to its slow, predictable rhythm. Tom's disappearance slowly became an unsolved mystery. One of those strange events that didn't quite make sense but was too difficult to keep questioning. It was simply too painful to keep digging into. As the years passed, rumors began to spread, each more bizarre than the last. Some of the locals believed that Tom had been attacked by wildlife, that perhaps a bear or wild boar had taken him down in the dense woods. Others whispered that he had fallen into one of the many deep crevices in the swamp, the dangerous waters swallowing him whole. There were even rumors that Tom had fled voluntarily, possibly due to financial troubles or something more personal. But no one believed that version. Tom Ellis was not the type to disappear without a word, to abandon his family, and the people who knew him well refused to entertain such thoughts. Still, as the years passed and the official search slowed to a crawl, the town began to speak in hushed tones. The swamp was a place that had taken people before. Some would disappear without explanation, as though the land itself had claimed them. The locals called it the Hollow Mire, a dark part of the swamp known for its eerie silence and stories of people who had simply vanished without a trace. It was a place that seemed to devour everything that entered, swallowing whole any souls that dared to venture too deep. Through it all, Lana's grief remained unchanged. She couldn't let go of the idea that Tom was still out there somewhere, waiting to be found. Tom's hunting cabin remained exactly as it had been, untouched since the day he left. The walls still held the faint scent of wood smoke. The tools were neatly arranged on the workbench, and his clothes hung in the closet. Every evening, she would light a candle and place it on the windowsill, letting it burn until the flames flickered out. It was her quiet way of keeping Tom's memory alive, holding on to the hope that one day he would return. But time, as it often does, eroded hope. Billy, Tom's teenage son, grew older, but the mystery of his father's disappearance remained etched in his mind. As a child, Billy had asked questions. Where's Dad? When is he coming home? But as he grew, the questions changed. They became quieter, less frequent, but deeper in their resonance. Billy spent most of his childhood haunted by the absence of his father, and in many ways, it shaped the person he was becoming. He couldn't escape the question, where had his father gone? The idea that Tom could still be out there, lost in the swamp, was something that never quite left him. It became a shadow that hung over Billy, shaping his decisions, his relationships, and his sense of the world. And so, the years passed. As they always do, the swamp remained the same, seemingly untouched by time. People came and went, but the mystery of Tom Ellis's disappearance stayed in the background, a haunting memory for those who remembered. Then, in 2015, a strange call reached Lana. The voice on the phone was calm but urgent. A researcher, working near the edges of the swamp, claimed to have found Tom's camera buried in an abandoned part of the swamp. The camera, like so many other things, had been left untouched by the passing years. Hidden beneath layers of mud and overgrowth, it was sent back to Lana, carefully packed and returned to her. She couldn't believe it. Tom's camera. When the camera arrived, Lana's hope reignited for the briefest of moments. The photos were mostly damaged, but after careful restoration, a single image stood out. It was a shot of Tom, standing by the swamp's edge, smiling in the dim light of the evening, his face partly obscured by shadows. The photograph was the only trace of him, frozen in time. But it was the final image that disturbed her. It was taken just before the storm hit, and in the background, the shadows seemed to form shapes that didn't belong. The photo didn't give Lana the answers she had desperately sought. Instead, it raised more questions. Who had Tom been with? Why did the shadows look like people? And where was Tom now? The town's stories began to resurface. Whispered once more, stories of the Hollow Mire, where the land took its own, where people disappeared without a trace and were never found. It seemed as if the swamp had claimed Tom too, taking him away without explanation, as if it had swallowed him whole. 15 years later, a storm would unearth what had been hidden beneath the swamp's surface. The southern swamp, once seemingly timeless, had changed. The storm that raged through the region in 2020 was unlike any in recent memory. Days of torrential rainfall had swollen the rivers and flooded the marshes, sending water surging through the dense undergrowth and shifting the landscape. Trees toppled, and the once familiar swampland became a dangerous, unpredictable maze. After the storm had passed, a team of environmental researchers was dispatched to assess the damage. Their goal was simple: study the impact of the storm on the swamp ecosystem. They expected to find erosion, damaged vegetation, and perhaps a few displaced animals. What they didn't expect was to uncover something much darker, something that had been hidden beneath the swamp for years. The researchers, led by Dr. Rachel Hayes, an expert in swamp ecosystems, set out with a mix of excitement and caution. The storm had exposed parts of the swamp that had been untouched for decades, and they were eager to collect new data. They deployed drones to map the area, scan for changes in water levels, and ventured deeper into the swamp to assess the ecological changes. As the group made their way through the swamp, they began to notice something unusual: fragments of old equipment, tattered clothing, and signs of human activity buried beneath the flooded waters. At first, they thought it was debris from the storm, remnants of old logging camps or other past human presence. But as they ventured further into the waterlogged swamp, the pieces began to tell a different story. Old boots tangled in the roots of a fallen tree, a rusted rifle half submerged in the mud, and a backpack with a name on the front: Tom Ellis, Dr. Hayes knelt down to examine the bag, her heart skipping a beat. She recognized the name immediately. It was the name of the local hunter who had vanished 15 years ago. Tom Ellis. She didn't need to open the bag to know what she had found. The unmistakable gear and rifle were his. The researchers exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what they had stumbled upon. They carefully examined the backpack. Inside, they found a waterproof notebook with Tom's writing and a journal that had somehow survived the swamp's harsh conditions. Tom had clearly been an experienced outdoorsman, someone who understood the dangers of the swamp and knew how to survive. His journal entries were unsettling. He had described the swamp in detail, from the wildlife to the changing weather patterns. But as the entries went on, they began to take on a darker tone. The last entry was brief but chilling. "Something is watching me. The swamp feels alive in a way I can't explain. I can hear whispers in the wind, see shapes moving in the fog. I don't know how much longer I can stay." Dr. Hayes' team carefully began cataloging their findings, collecting samples and analyzing the area. As they moved deeper into the swamp, they found something even more remarkable: a hidden chamber beneath a massive tree root system. The swamp's flooding had shifted the earth, exposing a cave-like formation that had remained concealed for who knew how long. Inside, the team found remnants of old tools and camping gear, clearly not from Tom's expedition, but seemingly far older. The items were deteriorated, some covered in moss and damp earth, but they had clearly been there for years, possibly decades. As they ventured further into the cave, the air became heavier, the humidity unbearable, the space was narrow, and the walls seemed to close in on them. Yet, it wasn't just the physical claustrophobia that unnerved them. It was the stillness of the space. The air was thick, like a weight pressing on their chest, and the only sound they could hear was their own breath. Then, in a corner of the cave, they found something that froze them in their tracks. Another journal. It was Tom's. This journal, unlike the first, had been sealed away carefully, hidden beneath the roots of an ancient tree. It was clearly older and in worse condition, but still intact. As they flipped through the pages, the team could see the desperation in Tom's writing. His early entries had been filled with his usual observations of the swamp, but as time went on, they grew more erratic, paranoid even. He had written about feeling followed, hearing strange noises, and noticing unusual markings on the trees. He mentioned discovering ancient, weathered carvings on rocks near his campsite, carvings that seemed out of place in the natural landscape. The last few pages of Tom's journal were incomplete, hastily scrawled, as if he had been writing in a frenzy. They're not just watching me, they're waiting. The ice calls. The vines want me. I hear them. I have to leave. But the forest is in my mind. It's closing in. The entries made it clear that Tom's mind had been unraveling. But what did he mean by the vines want me? And what was he referring to with the ice calls? As they explored further, they noticed footprints in the mud near the cave. These footprints didn't match Tom's size. They were larger, deeper, and more recent. The team was left with more questions than answers. Had Tom been alone in the swamp? Or had someone or something else been there with him? Was it another human presence? Or was it something darker, something tied to the jungle itself? The findings were both thrilling and terrifying. What had they uncovered? Were they on the brink of discovering Tom's final secret? Or had they unearthed something that was never meant to be found? The storm had unveiled a secret buried beneath the swamp, a secret Tom had left behind. The findings in the swamp had already shocked the research team, but as they dug deeper, the revelations became more unsettling. The team, led by Dr. Rachel Hayes, had recovered what was once thought to be lost, Tom Ellis's journal, along with several pieces of his equipment. But there was more, much more. What they discovered next wasn't just evidence of a disappearance. It was proof that Tom's fate was connected to something far darker than they had imagined. Forensics took over the analysis of the items found near the swamp's hidden cave. The journal pages, though weathered and torn, were soaked with what appeared to be blood. It was a chilling sign that something had gone terribly wrong. The forensic team's analysis confirmed the blood was Tom's. This grim finding put the theory of an accidental death to rest. The bloodstains were indicative of some kind of struggle, but there were no other signs of violence. It was as if Tom had written his final thoughts while being pursued, the ink smudging with his fading strength. The equipment found nearby, including Tom's rifle and backpack, matched the DNA of the missing hunter. The search team had no doubt now. Tom had been here. But how long had he been trapped in the swamp? And what had happened to him? Why had he never returned home? Dr. Hayes's team, now thoroughly shaken, continued to examine the cave and its contents. The cave system was deeper than they first realized. As they traced the walls, they uncovered remnants of old traps and tools, clearly human-made. These weren't part of any normal expeditions or research efforts. The tools and traps were crude, suggesting someone or something had been living in the cave long before Tom ever arrived. Signs of habitation were scattered throughout the chamber, items left behind in a rush, items that didn't belong to Tom. The most disturbing discovery, however, was the series of unnatural carvings on the cave's walls. They appeared to be ancient symbols, ones that didn't seem to belong to any known culture. Some of the carvings looked like crude depictions of figures, but others were much more abstract. They were geometric, almost alien, and they seemed to pulse with a strange energy as the researchers examined the carvings. A chill ran down their spines. What had Tom been investigating? Had he uncovered something that was never meant to be found? As they continued their work, they came across something else. Footprints. The prints were human-sized, deep in the mud near the cave entrance. The depth and shape of the prints were consistent with Tom's size. But they were not his. These prints were fresher, clearly made after Tom's disappearance. They led toward the entrance of the cave, disappearing into the thick swamp. Whoever had left them was still out there, still moving through the swamp. The researchers were left with a terrifying question. Had Tom been lured into a trap by someone? Or had something supernatural drawn him deeper into the swamp? The footprints, the carvings, and the eerie whispers in Tom's final journal entries all pointed to something far more than a simple accident. The swamp, it seemed, had a dark hold on him. But what had happened after that? Tom's last entries in the journal described strange figures he had seen moving through the trees, their forms half hidden by the thick fog that often rolled in over the swamp. Tom had described hearing disembodied voices whispering his name, and the trees themselves seemed to shift in unnatural ways, as if they were alive, watching him. In his final entry, Tom wrote, "I've seen them. They follow me, hidden in the fog. I don't know if I'll make it out alive, but I can't leave." His words grew more fragmented as if his mind had been unraveling. Tom had written about feeling trapped in the swamp, unable to escape its grasp. But who or what had been following him? Was it just his paranoia? Or had he uncovered something ancient in the swamp, something alive and aware of his presence? The carvings on the walls and the strange symbols painted across the cave only deepened the mystery. Had Tom been chasing something in the swamp that no one was meant to find? Was there something else in the hollow mire, waiting for those who ventured too far? As the forensic team continued their work, the findings began to suggest that Tom's disappearance wasn't just a tragic accident. It was part of something much larger. The swamp, with all its mysteries and dangers, seemed to have claimed him. But why? Was it an animal attack? Or was there something unnatural about the swamp that had drawn Tom into its depths? The prints in the mud were proof that someone or something had been there. But the question remained, what happened to Tom after that? Had Tom been lured into a trap by someone who had been living in the swamp for years? Or had the swamp claimed him for its own? The eerie carvings, the strange whispers, and the footprints pointed to something much darker than anyone could have imagined. The deeper the researchers dug, the more they realized that this was no ordinary case of a missing person. There was something more at play here, something ancient, something hidden beneath the swamp's murky surface. Had Tom been lured into a trap by someone or something in the swamp? Or had the swamp claimed him for reasons beyond comprehension? The years had passed, but the absence of Tom Ellis still hung heavily over his family, Lana and Billy, now both older and carrying the weight of time and loss. Finally returned to the swamp where Tom had disappeared. The journey wasn't easy. It was a trek back into a place that had swallowed their loved one whole. And yet it was also the only place they could go to feel connected to him once again. On a bright summer day in 2025, the two of them stood at the edge of the swamp, the dense trees looming in the distance. The thick, damp air felt suffocating as they approached the crevasse where Tom had vanished. Lana had kept their home preserved all these years, but she had never been able to bring herself to return to the place that held so many memories of Tom, until now. With a deep breath, she placed a small bouquet of wildflowers at the swamp's edge, the same flowers that had bloomed in Tom's favorite spot in the garden. The swamp seemed to respond in its eerie silence, as though acknowledging her presence. Billy, now a young man in his 20s, stood silently beside her. He had grown up without a father, but the mystery of Tom's disappearance had always haunted him. The stories he had heard about the hollow mire, about the strange whispers, and about the unseen figures in the fog had only deepened his desire to uncover the truth. But now, standing in the very place where Tom had vanished, he wasn't sure whether the answers would bring relief or torment. As Lana gazed out at the vast, untouched landscape, she felt the weight of all the unanswered questions that had lingered over the years. What had happened to Tom? Had the swamp truly claimed him? Or had he fallen prey to something else, something that couldn't be explained? The strange carvings found in the cave, the the footprints leading nowhere. And the eerie whispers had never fully left her mind. Months earlier, a new round of sightings had reignited the mystery. Local hunters and travelers near the swamp began reporting strange sounds late at night. Voices calling out from the mist, footsteps echoing in the fog, and glimpses of mysterious figures moving through the trees. Some claimed to have seen figures in the mist, shadowed outlines that seemed to be watching them, vanishing as quickly as they appeared. The townspeople whispered that the swamp had a life of its own, that it kept its secrets, and that Tom's disappearance had been only the beginning. Online communities had begun to speculate more fervently in recent years, reviving interest in the case. Some skeptics believed Tom's death was an accidental wildlife attack, his body dragged off by a predator. Others, however, clung to the idea that the swamp held something darker, something older. The mysterious figures, the whispers, and the carvings on the trees only fueled the supernatural theories. Some argued that the swamp was alive, that it was watching, and that it had drawn Tom into its depths for reasons no one could explain. But there was one discovery that would bring a final shocking twist to the mystery, one that would change everything. In 2026, a local hunter, out in the swamp near the old cave system, came across something unexpected. As he made his way through the dense brush, he noticed fresh markings on the bark of the trees near the cave. These weren't like the natural patterns the trees had grown. These were deliberate, carved symbols, almost like writing. As he looked closer, he saw something that took him by surprise. Tom's name etched into the bark, along with a strange symbol that looked unfamiliar but unsettlingly familiar all at once. The markings were new, clearly not part of the original carvings that had been uncovered. What was more disturbing was the date beneath the symbol, 2 years after Tom's disappearance. The hunter's heart raced as he took a photo of the markings and shared it with local authorities. When the police arrived, the carvings were confirmed to be recent, having been made after Tom had vanished. This discovery led to even more questions. Why had Tom's name appeared here? And why now, 2 years after his disappearance? Had someone been using the swamp all this time as a ritualistic hideout, marking their presence over the years? Or had Tom somehow been involved in something much larger than a simple hunting accident? Lana and Billy, upon hearing this news, were overwhelmed with emotions. It was as if the swamp was reaching out to them again, offering no answers, only more mysteries. Standing there, by the edge of the swamp, they couldn't help but feel the weight of the unanswered questions pressing down on them. Had Tom really been taken by the swamp? Or had something more sinister been at play all along? The markings on the trees didn't answer all the questions. They only opened up more. Was Tom somehow connected to the strange forces at work in the swamp? Had the swamp claimed him? Or was there something deeper beneath its surface? Theories of an ancient curse, an undiscovered secret, and supernatural forces continued to spread. The Hollow Mire was no longer just a local legend. It was a place where people disappeared, and the mystery lingered on. Billy stood silently, thinking back to his childhood, the long years of waiting, and the haunting question of what had happened to his father. Would they ever find out the truth? Or had the swamp claimed their answers, keeping them hidden forever? The mystery of Tom Ellis had become a part of the town's history, and now, the legacy of his disappearance was something that would never fade. The swamp, with its secrets and myths, had taken Tom, and in doing so, it had taken more than just one man. It had taken the answers, too. A local hunter stumbles upon new markings carved into the trees near the cave system. The carvings appear to match Tom's handwriting and have a date marked 2 years after Tom's disappearance. Because some swamps don't just hide their secrets. They keep them, waiting to reveal them when no one expects it.